today we'll talk about the principle of perspective. Perspective is the way you answer the why question, right? Perspective is an attitude, it's a self-evaluation. It's not only a self-evaluation, but it's the way you evaluate the things around you, the circumstances that is happening in your life, the situations that are going around you. Your perspective is what builds your perception. If you have seen last week videos, we talked about the principle of perception, right? Inside principle of perception, we talked about there are two realities to the thing. First, the truth, the way things really are, and second was the way you perceive it, the way you see it. So our perspective is what builds our perception. And today, we're gonna put our focus a little bit on learning about what is perspective, what is the importance of perspective, and how our perspective builds us, how our perspective defines us, how we understand things according to our perspective, right? And before we start, I wanna read a short story to you. And the story goes like this. The title of the story is The Two Wolves, right? It says, an old Cherokee chief was teaching his grandson about life. A fight is going on inside me, he said to the boy. It is a terrible fight, and it is between two wolves. One is evil, he is anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, self-doubt, and ego. The other is good. He is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. The same faith is going on inside you and inside every other person too. The grandson thought about it for a minute and then asked his grandfather, which wolf will win? The old chief simply replied, the one you feed. The one you feed is what's going to build your perspective, right? The perspective has two aspects, positive perspective or it's a negative perspective. Positive perspective we will build into positive perception. Negative perspective will build into negative perception. The definition of perspective as we find in a dictionary is a particular attitude towards or a way of regarding something. It's a point of view. The true understanding of the relative importance of things is a sense of proportion. We must keep a sense of perspective about things we do. Perception enables you to interpret things. Perspective is the way you view things. So you build your perspective to build your perception. We use our perspective to make our perception. Putting oneself into other perspective changes our perceptions, right? So when our perspective changes, our perception changes. The most important thing is our perspective, right? Perspective is a particular way of considering something. Perspective is the way you regard the situation, is the way you regard the circumstances, right? We carry perspective in every areas of our life, right? There is perspective about who we are. There's a perspective about the possessions that we have. The perspective about the work we do. Not question why we do the work, why we have to do this, why it has to be this certain way, right? There's so many why questions that you answer within perspective, right? You have a perspective about humility. You have a perspective about leadership. You have a perspective about teamwork. There is a perspective about crisis. There is a perspective about wisdom. And every time we talk about the question perspective, we come to the point of view. It is like, why is this? What is your perspective on wisdom? When something crisis happens in our life, when something experience that we can be defined as a crisis, when you're going through the situation of crisis in our life, the way we look at it is determined by what we think it is. It's our perspective. So when it comes to perspective, when we understand things and we develop our attitude, we develop our perceptions depending on perspective, there are three things that we have to consider. And these three things are very crucial, right? When we're trying to perceive things, there are three realities of everything that is happening around you. There are three realities of what you think about yourself. There is three realities to how you perceive yourself. There is three realities to how you perceive the people around you. There is three realities to how you perceive the relationships around you, right? First is what you feel and what you understand, right? So for example, if you are going through a given circumstance, you're experiencing a certain situation around you, that something is happening around you, what you feel about that is the first thing. Second is how God sees it and understands it. What God says about it is the second thing. And the third is what the world around you is saying about it, right? We're looking at an example of circumstance, and there is a certain circumstance going. First is what you're feeling about it. Second is what God is saying about it. And third is what is the world around you saying about it. What are the people around you saying about it? What you feel is the emotion, your emotion. What God says about it is the truth. And what the world is saying about it is the confusion. Why? Because the world around you can have a very different perspective into the circumstances that you're trying to understand, right? So if it consists of a group of people, and if the group of people all have a different perspective, the interpretation that you're going to get from them will be according to their perspective, will be according to how they have been perceiving that circumstance. So from every single individual, you're going to get it in a very different way. Right. But for us, as we are seeker of truth, as we are the followers of Christ, as we're trying to find the truth in every circumstances, we have to set aside the emotions that we are feeling. We have to set aside the voices that you're hearing around us, what the people in the world is saying about it, and we have to pursue the truth into it. What is the real perspective of that circumstances? Why is it happening? What God has been doing, what God is saying about it will help you come to the place of breakthrough. Because sometimes we can have right emotions with wrong information. And emotions are not always sign of things of having a right perspective. Just for an example, right? You might be feeling hurt by someone because someone told you about that person said, and you're developing a wrong perspective of the whole situation because you heard that somebody said something about you from somebody else. And what you're feeling could be right. What you're feeling, the emotion that you're feeling is you're hurt by hearing is right, but your emotions might change when you discover the truth in their circumstances. How you're responding might change, right? So your emotion is always based on the perspective. Your emotions are always based on the way you are understanding it, right? So there's always three aspects to everything that is going. There's only three aspects to the way you're perceiving things. First is you, second is God, and third is world. And the only way to get a right perspective on things, the only way to develop a right perspective on things is by trying to find a truth in their circumstances, is to looking for a truth, is to become a seeker of truth. The breakthrough in our life lies in the ability to distinguish between these three facts. If we are able to discriminate between these three things happening, we'll be able to gain a right perspective in every circumstance. That we are able to discern our emotions, that we are able to discern what God is saying, and we are able to separate it from what we're hearing from around us and what the world is saying. Because popular thoughts are not always the right thoughts, right? The popular perspective are not always the right perspective. Just because everybody else is doing it, it doesn't make it right. Democracy is not a criteria to fulfill the righteousness. We don't define righteousness by the sense of how many people are doing it, but the definition of righteousness is pulled from the biblical worldview of what God says what real righteousness looks like. In just an example of righteousness, there could be different examples that we can draw. What God says about you, right? Maybe people have spoken so many negative things about in your life, so you have developed a bad perspective of who you are, the broken perspective of who you are. But again, it's not the reality of what it is. Here are few things that can help you develop a right perspective. First is seek for biblical truth in all and everything. And this does not happen automatically. This just does not happen by itself. It takes an intentional commitment. Is when I'm experiencing something conflicting, if something is conflicting me, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to respond to it quickly. I'm not going to express my views about it quickly. I'm not going to develop my perspective around it quickly. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and seek truth. I'm going to do my own research. I'm going to try to find out what the biblical principle behind it. What does God say about it? Just because somebody said something, I'm not going to make it my value. I'm not going to adopt it as to be my value, as to be my perspective, but I'm going to go and find the truth. That I will become the seeker of the truth. That commitment, that intentional commitment will help us. That everything that we encounter, either it's crisis, if you're going through a crisis, I'm going to seek first what is the truth in that circumstances. What is God saying about that perspective? Instead of developing a wrong perspective about myself and about the situation, except developing a wrong perspective of such as it's happening because God doesn't love me, it's happening because people don't like me, it's happening because everybody's trying to attack me. Instead of developing this wrong perspective, I'll try to find a truth into it. Right? Second is I will try to look at the big picture. Right? So whenever some circumstances that we face, something that happens, and if we look at it, when we get so narrow about it, it's very difficult to develop an understanding from it. That we'll have to try to look at the big picture, that we cannot get so focused in just small thing, because it's very difficult to understand things if we have not made it broader, if we have not tried to look at the big picture. Right? If we don't see it in a process, if we just look at the small piece to it, right? So trying to discover a big picture. What is the big picture, right? Where am I going? What is my end goal? Where do I want to end up? And then we try to narrow it down from a big picture, and then we try to discover what the reality of the fact is. Next is be open for counsel. That's how we can develop a healthy perspective. That attitude of nobody can tell me what to do always set us up for failure. When we are not open to seek counsel, but we are so focused on what I think is right, when we're so focused on what I believe is right, when I'm so focused on what I know is right. If we want to develop a healthy perspective about ourselves, when we develop a healthy perspective about the things happening around us, we have to seek counsel from others. Because we cannot ever make a wise decision when we are broken. We can never make a healthy decision when we are broken. And when you find yourself in that circumstances, the best thing you can do is seek counsel from outside. The best thing you can do is try to find how other people have seen it. And that might help you to come out of that circumstances, of that crisis, taking counsel from others. Next is having a positive mindset. Try to look for positive in every situation. That's changing our focus from negative to positive. Right? Even we are going through a chaos, even our circumstances is not as desirable that we hoped it to be. Even we are going through a crisis, we're looking for a positive into it. Because looking for a positive into it helps you keep your perspective right. Keep your perspective close to the truth. Help your perspective close to the reality. Because negative perspective can result into negative emotions. Negative emotions can build into negative attitude and perceptions. And it can be very damaging in the long run. Sometimes we don't see the fruit of negative perspective as quickly, but in the long run, it can be very damaging. And that is the power of perspective. The perspective is our attitude. Perspective is what we produce. Perspective what we result into the things that we do. Perspective is what contributes to our success. Either we're going to grow or we don't going to grow. It depends upon the perspective, how we see ourselves, right? If our perspective is we're not good for anything, we'll never be able to achieve anything in our life. If our perspective about ourselves is we don't have a capacity to do anything, to produce anything good. I don't have a capacity to achieve certain dreams. You'll not even ever try to achieve those dreams. And then your perceptions of things around you will become same. Say everything that will happen around you, you will interpret it as a sign that you are right? You'll interpret it as, see, I knew I'm not gonna do it, that's why it is happening. See, this is another indication that I shouldn't do it. So your perspective is define your perceptions. Your perspective determines either you're gonna grow or not. Your perspective defines either you're gonna have a success or not. Your perspective defines how fruitful you're gonna be in your leadership or not. Your perspective is what defines your life. Your perspective is going to define your end goal. Your perspective is going to define how far you go in your life.